So for those people who don't know me, I'm Grant Gemmell. I'm the managing director here at Facet5 Global. We're based in Cambridge in the United Kingdom, and we've got a whole range of people from all over the world, everywhere from North Carolina at 3 a.m. in the morning right through to Australia. So thank you for coming along and contributing to just my session, but also I hope you've had a chance to maybe attend a couple of other sessions as as Elvis says, we're here in the building all week. And welcome everybody. And you can actually enroll in sessions as we go. So today I'm going to share a few slides and a video and just have a conversation. And I welcome your input into that and the diverse points of view that we have. So let me jump into the screen and let's get started. What we're talking about today, if I just come back, is my view around personality at the heart of the learning and development process, or L&D. And I think there's we're at a really interesting point, I think, in history, and the role of what personality does in terms of bringing that to life and allowing us as individuals, but also as leaders and organizations, to take a step forward collectively. So I said, we're recording. You're more than welcome to leave your video on. If you don't, you can just turn it off. Either way suits. I was speaking with a client the other day, and the first thing that came out of her mouth was, "The world's gone mad and people are crazy." And it's quite funny because I kind of looked at her and went, you know what? I think you may be right. I think that actually it's a really interesting position that we find ourselves in the world just at the moment. And it got me really thinking then, well, actually, has the world gone mad? And are people crazy? Has anything actually changed, or is it just our perception of that that's driving that? And I think we're all probably familiar with the concept of VUCA, of that volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that we've lived in. And I don't think that that's any different to what it has been. And for those people who don't know, VUCA was coined, I think, by the US Army War College post the Cold War, and it was helping us kind of put some language around the challenges that were presented in a post-Cold War environment. And what we have found is that we've just adopted that in our leadership language and strategic planning and organizational development. So when I had to think back, and I asked my friend ChatGPT, because he's quite clever at some things, I said, well, what actually has changed over the last year? Is it our sense that the world is gone mad and people are crazier than ever? Or has it always been that way? And really, when we think about it, and we come back, the beginning of my working career in the 80s, we certainly have had a lot of things happen. But has there been a pivotal point really in our recent history that means that things and the pace of change and the magnitude of change is increased, that it feels just more intense and more pervasive and a lot more to process than it ever has? But if I think about, the VUCA mindset, sometimes it just describes me on a good day. But I think the concept is as pertinent as today as it ever has been. When I look across all of these, and these are just a random selection of events that have happened over a timeline, and there are as many, when I think about it, there are as many great events, many things that have happened that are just as inspiring as there are horrifying. And it got me thinking around, what is it about a human nature that inspires us to bridge difference, for example, to build trust and to create amazing things when we come together? And what is it about difference and maybe trust in itself, or the lack of trust that actually creates division or moments of reflective history that we're not so proud of. So it got me thinking about the concept of trust more broadly and the concept of difference. And that when we have trust, it's a real unifier in the way that we live and the way we work. And actually, it's quite a fundamental in life. Without trust, we don't have quality of relationships. We don't have um, societal cohesion. We don't have the ability to really effectively and robustly collaborate to create great things. So trust becomes a really interesting concept for me. And I think it's embedded in and intertwined in to a lot of the things that we do day to day. Just stopping there very quickly, as in terms of trust and that timeline and that opening comment that the world's gone mad and people are crazy, would you agree with that? Would you feel that that sense of pace and magnitude of change is really amplified? Do you feel that in the work that you do, in the relationships that you have, in your observation?
I'm not sure that I would.
Mm,
Um, Partly because I became a bit of a fan of Steven Pinker, and if you read his book, I've forgotten what it's called, but anyway, there's something about the angels. But he actually wrote it, and it was somewhat controversial at the time. It's not that long ago, maybe 10 years, where he said if you look back in history, we're actually at the most peaceful time in history.
mm,
It's a bit hard to believe that when you look at the news every day, and there
mm.
are terrible, terrible things going on. But compared to what was going on, I think it was, well, and his writing and research supports it, that actually we're not doing too badly. So I would say it hasn't gone completely mad in that way. Um, Picking up your other point, though, on trust, I don't know whether you've picked up on the what's happened with OpenAI,
Mm,
with them chucking the guy out, the CEO, and the reason given was the board has lost trust.
mm.
Well, I'm not sure they did the right thing with that, because not only did he go to Microsoft, but apparently 700 of his colleagues have also said, we're going as well. Well, they've
Yeah,
only got 740 employees. So, yeah, I think you're right. Trust is clearly important. So,
yeah, yeah.
um, I don't
And
know
how
what's
we
happening there, though.
And I think in terms of how we define trust and uh, our our view of trust and whether we give it easily, sustain it easily, and develop it easily, or there's a few hoops to jump through. But I think there is a common element there, which is without trust, then a lot of the work that we do is much harder. We're spending more time and more effort trying to bridge a divide, and what that divide feels like it sometimes is that chasm is quite insurmountable for people. So I think trust is an underlying feature there.
Mm, yeah.
Um,
Uh,
let me jump back into the slide. So
right.
we think about then uh, that if trust becomes more of a cornerstone of our society, then actually what is it about trust and has that changed over the number of years? I don't know if people know the Edelman barometer, trust barometer at all, but it's a fantastic site. I do warn you, it's not all roses and cheers and champagne for sure, but it does give you a really great indicator of a yearly trend in the way that we perceive the rest of the world, and particularly government and media and non-government organizations and business, for example. But as you can imagine, what they have found is that trust has been in decline for a number of years now. And in particular, trust in our government and in our media has um, fallen sharply over since 2012, right through to the point that we're getting what they call global pandemic or epidemic or a crisis around trust in itself. And ending up in around that 2021, 2022, really amplified with what they call that epidemic of misinformation and mistrust, leading us to really doubt our governments, doubting our media, doubting large business, leading to a world that potentially has become more polarized than it ever has become before. Now, I do that I say that with a bit of caution because it's in my lifetime, I suppose. I mean, we have had world wars, we have had horrific conflict, and we have had huge division. But in terms of trust, when we start measuring it, then the Edelman Trust Barometer is a really interesting concept. Now, the interesting thing here, though, for me, and as I take you kind of on a couple of detours around the garden path with my conversational presentation, is that while the drop in trust in our leaders, in our journalists, in our media, and potentially large organizations, so we have a declining trust. Actually, what we have seen is a stabilization or a small increase in trust more locally in my business, in my leader, in my co-workers, in my neighbors, in my community. So while the world around us has certainly become fractious and harder to engage with, we have turned back more tribally, I suppose you could say, looking for more support and relevance in a smaller community of people. And it's not unusual, I think, when we think about the world, and I look at the news just at the moment, my ability to process and display empathy and provide empathy, or even think compassionately, I feel has become reduced because it feels like there's just more than I can manage. So we're finding that we become quite overwhelmed by that because a sense of helplessness does come in. So naturally, we look more locally for that. And a great example of that is community leaders during COVID, for example, those small community people, independent leaders coming in, providing more support, working with their communities, working with other people. So that level of trust has, while it's not in a global picture, it certainly has come more locally. What does that mean, I suppose? And then I'll ask your point of view. More than ever, then, that if we think about leadership, has become more, is going to play a biggest opportunity in a more critical role. If we're moving away and we're looking at leadership and the trust that we want from our leaders from more broadly to more locally, then actually leaders have more than ever have an opportunity to play. Not only in their own organizations, but the Edelman Barometer also talks about more broadly and more societally as well. We are expecting more from our leaders and our businesses, not just to act in local, and not only in their own businesses, but in their communities as well. Let me just mute a couple of people there in the background. So that means that the capabilities of our leaders, I think, has never been more important. And that organizations, and in particular, the learning and development functions, or the supporting functions that go around that, have a critical role in supporting this. Let me just stop there. Any view on that? Any comments on that? Do you think that is a fair point, or is that just rubbish, jog on, nothing to see here?
Grant, this is Martha.
Okay.
Sorry, who was
There
that?
is actually a really large chunk of work that's been done. I was going out and facilitating large groups of local leaders for the federal government. So I was hired by an institute, an agency in the federal, to go out and talk to the local leaders about the work they were doing in their communities and to help perpetuate that across the communities, because they were seeing a huge inability for them to actually be trusted and to get information out there. So again, sort of building that network. And then the other question that I had for you is, have we seen a shift in that same timeline that you presented? What is the shift in trust scores been in the Facet instrument?
Yeah, and that's a very good question, and thank you for leading me into the next part of the presentation. We have had a look at that, and I will come to that. But I think, yes, I hadn't, and thank you for bringing up the work, amazing work that you're doing at that community level. And it kind of amplifies for me and reinforces the need for and the trust that we have in more local communities. We have always been more of a tribal being, and we've always lived in small communities. We've always had people around us, so it's not unusual for us then, as the world goes, quietly mad and chaotic and more what we feel more frenetic than ever, is to draw back in and to hold those around us more closely. But it also has then great positives, but also can then also have some negatives in terms of misinformation and skewing of people's realities in that environment. But from a business perspective, I do think it's a linchpin of a moment where we are looking to our leaders, and anybody who is doing work with leaders or is a leader. I think you'll agree with me saying leaders' roles have amplified, they've become more intensified. We are asking more of them on a more regular basis than we ever have before. We are having to think more broadly as leaders, and thinking not only of the impact on our own self and our own staff, but our own business, our own society, and having to do that on a more consistent and at a quicker pace than we've ever had to do, because it's a more competitive market as the markets change more frequently, and what the world needs more frequently. Having to keep up with that is quite difficult. Let me just jump back in. Thank you for those people and your points of view. Now, so where else are we seeing this trend, I suppose? There's a whole range of yearly HR reports, for example, that have come out, Gartner, LinkedIn, PwC, McKinsey, all of those do HR reviews each year. And in 2023, what we're seeing out of the Gartner report, for example, which is freely available online, it's a really interesting piece of work, is that 60% of HR leaders are prioritizing leader and manager effectiveness, and that 83% of organizations expressed a desire to become more people-centric, have a more people-centric culture. So what does that actually mean? I suppose it's about recognizing that there is a set of core capabilities that our leaders and managers need in order to be effective. Obviously, it's a commercial mindset as well, and that when we have those and we recognize that when we are more people-centric, that we create more value because we're reducing turnover, we're increasing engagement, and obviously things like discretionary effort. Gartner, in their report, and this is an adaptation of that, we're speaking about the human-centric leadership model. And, just like everything, it kind of swings and roundabouts, I suppose. But there is a real shift from technical skills, I think, in the last couple of years into more people skills or soft skills, for example. I think soft skills are still a little bit limiting, and so we're using the word capability. What are those capabilities that leaders need, and what's that new approach or is it an old new approach? Is it just sort of come back again when they relate to both to themselves in terms of being authentic, having true expression, understanding themselves and seeking to understand others. looking to relate to others differently. So showing more genuine care, more respect, more concern for other people, building trust, understanding difference, being more encompassing, and the diversity, equity, inclusion agenda, for example, Black Lives Matter, all of those sort of things are good representations of that. And then importantly, the capabilities that we need in order to reflect that in our role and our response to, and you could change role to context, for example. Let me just close that. And I think you're right, Martha, essential skills, not soft skills. These are the human skills or human capabilities that we believe at Facet5, or me in particular, I suppose, is that we have a range of those that we use day in, day out. These are essential components of, and then when we start to master those, understand those, adapt our approach and understand others and ourselves, we can actually create a human-centric business and society and community quite easily. Well, easily with a little bit of effort, but you get my point. So another little detour for those people that know me. I do like to crisscross my thoughts, but I'm going to just try and see if I can play a video for you. So let me see if I can share this. And I don't know if people have seen this before, but I do quite like it. So let me know if you can't hear the sound.
Generasi ini narsis.
Sorry, it's in
semaunya.
So let me stop that. Let me just have a conversation while I find the actual English version of that video.
Yeah.
Which would be helpful, unless you're fluent in Bahasa like I am, and Polish and all the other languages that I don't speak as well. But one of the questions that we did have from Martha was, obviously, has personality changed over that period? What is the thing that maybe is consistent or inconsistent over that period of time? We have Norman here, and I don't know people who don't know Norman. He is the founder and author of Facet5. And we went back through the data over a longer period of time, over the last sort of 20 years, just to have a think about what would that data look like. So let me just come back to here while I find that video. Mm-hmm. So what hasn't changed at the same rate? Well, we believe that our personalities have remained fairly consistent, not identical, but over the last number of years, you'll find that the data, say from 2012 to 2023, and even the data preceding that, what we'll find is that the data is remained, the mean scores over time have remained fairly consistent. You're not seeing massive fluctuations here in the data set. Now, this is global data, so it's collective data, so it does include all countries and genders and generations as well. And I think the interesting thing about this for me is that, while the world is going mad and people may be crazy, actually, when we think about it, if we step out of that whirlwind for a moment, what we have is something that we can rely on over a longer period of time. Now, I'm not a fan of the fixed view, of a trait model view, that our personality doesn't change. I think it does, but it does it at a much slower rate, in a more predictable way over a longer period of time. Without that, everybody here would say, when you were younger, you feel quite different, and you probably have different capabilities and different views of the world than you do now. And that's to be expected. But the interesting thing here, and I'll ask for Norman's opinion just in a minute, just to pre-warn him, is that the data for me becomes a really important consideration then when we are developing our leaders. So let me just quickly go through my points, and I'm going to ask Norman for here. So if we're going to build capability in our leaders and our teams, then my view is that we need a consistent way of relating to ourselves, others, and our work. personality for me lies at the heart of how we go about building that capability, and that it makes our efforts more meaningful, more human or person-centric, a bit more enduring, because we have a bit more of a predictive understanding of what our development will do for an individual and how they can take that forward. So therefore, more a sustainable approach to capability. I'm just going to quickly stop there. So Norman, I'd be then interested in, having had a look at the data for me across that period of time, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, thanks, Rod. Sorry, can you? Yep. I am up. All right. Yep. A couple of points I'd make. One is that it does seem to be a constant question that people come up with about, how I've changed. I would strongly argue that they may have changed, but it's their behavior and their responses to situations that changes, not the core personality itself. I think that's unlikely to change very much, except, as you said, in long terms. I mean, there's some evidence that things like conservatism and stuff like that can change over a lifetime. But that raises the next point that I would make is all of the applications that we work in are relatively short term. They are talking about this person maybe for the next year or two. In business, I'm not aware of anybody who's trying to make decisions on what a person is likely to do in the next 25 years. And yet that's what there is research that does look at that kind of thing. There was a very crummy piece of research done when somebody pulled out 30-something thousand profiles that had been done on a Google test. And then they just split the sample up by age group and said, oh, look, there's differences. They then tried to say this is what has happened, that they have changed over time, which of course is just nonsense. But if you might remember, Grub, that you and I went to a country once where they were very, very keen on having strategies for managing millennials. That's when millennials were quite young. They're sort of like grown up with 4 kids now. And we had their data, and we were able to show that there was virtually no difference across the age groups that they had. We felt, well, I don't know what you felt, Graham, but I felt a little awkward because I was sort of saying to these people that a lot of the programs you've been building on how to manage a millennial might not be particularly useful. So yes, I think that's what I would say, is that if there are trends, they are long-term trends.
I'm going to give you my number one.
And I think also in that work that we did, when we asked for the expectation of what great leadership looks like and what was required of leaders across generations, there was no significant difference in the desire of different generations that we looked at around being included, being valued, about being understood or seeking to understand. Maybe significant difference in the way they go about doing that. But at the core of that, we're all looking for consistent things from our leaders. And that was a real surprise, because they were expecting them to, fit a mindset that they'd already been communicated to. And what we wanted to do is rebuke that and just say, well, actually, at our heart, our personalities, doesn't matter what our generation is, our personalities are playing a significant and unifying role there. And what we need to do is start thinking about how do we connect with each other, how do we understand each other, versus how do we just look at difference.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. So let me quickly go back to the slides, otherwise we could be here all day if I keep talking. So personality at the heart of the development. obviously, self-awareness, difference, uniqueness, and personality for us are not optional extras. They're a way of riding the waves of change in organizational performance, particularly that sense of self, being able to understand ourselves in the and then understanding ourselves in the context of our work and the environment we find ourselves, and then the ability then to master that and the flex that we often have to have. We also can say that, understanding personality helps individuals and businesses harness their own potential. And the way that we do that is through tailored development pathways, powered by personality, ensuring that personal accountability for learning and development. And I think there is a strong sense, and it's certainly in one of the presentations this afternoon around the inner development goals, where accountability is playing a much stronger role for a person's potential, and that the organization is there to provide the mechanisms and the environment and the right context for that to come to life. So it underpins that more sustainable L&D initiatives and mindset, moving away from disconnected sets of activities to a more strategic approach that allow people to pull that thread or that golden thread and use their personality, use the strengths of that personality throughout their working career. I think it also helps us, as we mentioned that first one, around enabling flex, that sense of technology shift, a culture shift, and all of those sort of things happening around us. When we have a better understanding of ourselves, and what our preferred approach is, that it gives us a better understanding of the flex that we need to the situation that we have. So I'm not saying that because our personality is our personality, we should be making an excuse and that, if you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It is helping us, understand ourselves through that initial assessment, and then helping us understand how, when, and why we need to flex in a different context. So I think that's really critical for a lot of learning and development situations. Is if we are going to help people, then we need to help them at a more fundamental level than just teaching them basic skills. Important in the mindset for Facet5 is that while assessment underpins action, it does not necessarily mean categorization. We're there to create more self-awareness, a better understanding between individuals, to create a starting point really for action to develop. That then individuals can, whatever their aspiration, can use that to be a better version of themselves. And I think that, personality can drive performance in that it's often an overlooked one, or that we are doing it because it's fun or easy, or it's another initiative. But when we combine personality and capability with the individual with a whole range of other initiatives, then I think we can create a more sustainable, more long-term, productive organization, community, and society. Any views on that? You think that's rubbish? I think that's about right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Francesco.
Yeah, look, I agree with everything you've been saying. I echo all your points, and I think the bottom line for me is that people are still people. People fundamentally haven't changed. We need quality of relationships. We need good quality communication. We need to be able to give and receive feedback, and it's all those things that come from understanding yourself and others, which I think improve all of that. Your earlier point about trust, I've seen it recently in an organisation where team members don't trust each other, or they're stretched to a point where they don't have the capacity to support each other. That's when those relationships start to break down. So it comes back to the quality of the relationships, I think, and just fundamentally, we're still people. We still need people.
And that the quality of relationship is about how do we help people understand each other, the difference, and celebrate that difference and the diversity that we have. But I think it plays, if I come to this next slide as well, which is while we provide great data in the Facet5 model, it's valid and it's reliable, it can be trusted, it's evidence-based, it's enduring. It's it's really then how do we bring that to life in the initiatives, and how do we create the insights from that data that allow it to be more meaningful and personal and insightful and contextual and intuitive. Lots of words there. But to your point, Francesca, how do we then help people bridge the gap? How do we ask people to take some action that's purposeful? How do you step forward in and sometimes that's quite scary, into a relationship in order to be more curious and to seek understanding in order to create more mutual outcomes? And then how do you demonstrate trust in that way? So I think personality helps us with quite a unique view. And we often talk about data to insights, insights to action. And while the data is great, it is still just data until we do something meaningful with it. A little bit of a personal indulgence here. And for those people who maybe dived into Ian's call yesterday around the future of personality assessment, for example. So while I have a very strong belief that I think personality and self-awareness are core, and accountability are core to what we're doing, not all personality data is equal. Now, if you're familiar with a whole range of personality models, and you may even use a few of those, whether they're trait-based, ipsative, or typologies, this picture is trying to represent the breadth and depth of the data that we measure. It's the breadth and the depth of, and it's just starting on, if I'm really honest, it's just starting to touch on the complexities and the magnificence and the magnitude of what personality actually looks like. So imagine each one of these squares has 50 different variations, and then you times that by 50, you get to about 10 trillion combinations of personality with a 5-factor with 13 sub-factors on a 10 scale score. It's then not about the breadth. It's not about how that data is then represented. Absolutely agree that simplification, pragmatic representation of the data is really, really important. And those little dots up in the top left-hand corner there are a typology for me and an ipsative. That is the breadth and the depth of the information that those models typically measure. Now, it's a generalization, I know, and I'm biased. Yes, I do get that. But if we were going to work with individuals, then wouldn't you want to know all about that person? Wouldn't you want to be able to represent that data in a more fuller way, regardless of how it's represented? If you then believe that you can take all of that and compress it into those small dots, and those small dots are amplified because I can't make them any smaller in that picture, then we are not doing, in my view, we are ticking a list, we are a box, we are not actually representing the whole of the individual in this process. Well, that's made a couple of people.
Sorry, somebody else.
Off you go.
I was going to say, and I totally agree with Grant, which is probably just as well. But my biggest concern about all of those things, apart from the gross oversimplification, is what is missing. And in all of those things, and there are plenty of papers around. I've written some. The one thing that is consistently missing from pretty well all of the other those ones that Grant's referring to, is emotionality. And there's they've just been seeing a few articles recently referring to it, about how emotionality permeates every other aspect that you see. It is the golden thread that, just to pick that line up again, the golden thread that runs through every single aspect of what we do and what we've seen. If you miss it, then you're missing probably about 27% of all the variation between people. And so that's another reason to be cautious with the oversimplification.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's my hobby horse.
I think we share that hobby horse. It gets ridden around quite a lot. Might need might need a little
Right.
rest at some
Yeah.
stage as well. So let's then think about, coming back from that little detour, a little personal rant of my own on accessibility of and encompassing in the measure of the data. As I mentioned before, it's not about then how we represent that data in a more simplified, pragmatic, and meaningful way, and making sure it's accessible. It is ensuring that we encompass the whole of the person in that process. So what we've been looking at then is, what do we think are these core capabilities or essential skills in how I relate to myself, how I relate to others, and how I relate to my role or organizational context around me. Now, there's going to be natural tensions and shifts and argy-bargy in between those different aspects of how we do that. And it's certainly going to be driven by the context that we find ourselves in. And that, we all know, and we all probably take more of a strength-based approach, is that when we do turn up well and we're in our right environment with the right people in the right role, for example, that natural sense of comfort and flow becomes quite natural. So we wanted to start to think about then, what are these capabilities that we have naturally been developing and that we're focusing on over the next little while. So some of these around the self then talk about self-awareness. They talk about an intimate understanding of our drivers, our motivators, our strengths overplayed, our values and opinions. And the role of then self-regulation in managing those in a more positive way, whether that is self-control, managing our opinions, managing our emotions. Importantly then, how do we go about instilling trust in ourselves from other people, and how do we build trust in that as a core capability? We've spoken about trust as a foundational piece, and I think it's a capability, a conversation, a practice skill set, a mindset that we need to really instill more. You could take open to learning and change, just change it to curiosity for me as well. But it's a little bit more, how do I step into a space and talk about, how do I have that discussion? How do I become curious and open to other people's viewpoints and different situations? And then importantly, what does resilience look like for me? This is not a prescribed model, but it's basically saying, how do I move from kind of an unsteady state to a steady state? And what does that look like for me? And what do I need to do that? If we then think about the how I relate to others, then how do I value difference? How do I influence other people positively? How do I collaborate? How do I communicate? How do I manage conflict? How do I participate in a team? And importantly, what are the social skills that I need in order to kind of grease the wheels of work? I don't think you could be quite proficient in all of these sort of things, but actually, if you've got poor social skills, then it doesn't always land very well. The last part then looks at the context, and when we've just restricted it down to role as well and organization. So I think then it's about what capabilities do we need in order to think more critically, solve problems collectively, to manage our work, to foster accountability in ourselves and other people. Move from what feels like a doing mindset to an action-oriented mindset, where action is a considered thought, a considered way of going forward. How we innovate, how we think strategically, and how we make effective decisions. So these are the capabilities, I think, that our personality and their core capabilities that we're investigating at the moment, to say, what are these and how do these look? How do we build these capabilities in individuals? And to your question, Martha, is there a differentiator between trusting self versus instilling trust and others trusting us? I think there probably is. I think others trusting us is when we relate to other people and we relate to our role, about turning up, doing what we say we're going to do, being not being duplicitous in our interactions with them. So I think when we instill trust in others, and we create trust, you need all of these in order to do that well. That's a bit of a...
Can I just make a comment about this, the whole concept of trust? One of the things that I think is significant about trust is it's not something that exists just in one person. It requires an activator from the other side. You don't trust well, I suppose people can doubt themselves. They're worrying about how they would behave. But generally speaking, what we're talking about is, do I trust that person, or does that person trust me? It requires a second person to do that. So there's an interaction effect there. And there's another thing I was going to say about trust. Oh yeah, you alluded to it there. Trust can be, well, I'll go back a point. I can remember when I first started talking to people about competencies, and every single organization I met said that the most important thing was integrity. I said, well, okay, makes sense. Suppose it is. What do you mean by it? And the best ones said, well, it means doing what you said you were going to do. I said, okay, so, and then you realize that that's not exactly what they meant, because if you said, I'm going to join this company and fire most of the people, change everything we do, and so on, basically take a chainsaw to the place. And if you did that, they'd have to say you're showing absolute integrity because you did exactly what you said you were going to do. But that's not what most companies mean when they say, oh, we want people who will behave with integrity. They want people who will behave nicely. And that's a very different thing. I can remember having those conversations with numerous organizations. And they were very keen on having integrity until they looked at it in detail and said, oh, maybe no, we need something else, and we just don't have the right word for it. So that's me.
Norman, it looks like we've lost Grant off the call.
It does, doesn't it?
No, I've
Here he is.
Here he is.
Sorry, my internet just had a momentary...
Okay. Your background? No. Right.
So I guess part of my question had to do with it being on that line with self versus being on the line with others. Because I was right where you are, Norman, from a standpoint of it takes two to tango.
Yeah.
And so that's why that was part of the question, was around it being in the line, of self.
Yeah. And I don't want to, I'm not dismissing the importance of trusting yourself. And that in itself is a complex situation. I'm sure there are people around who do doubt how they will behave in one situation or another. So you could say they don't trust themselves. But that's not, I think, what is generally meant by trust in, in society or in an organization. I remember once running a workshop, and there was a general thing running throughout it, which said, well, we're not going to say things properly here because we don't know what you're going to do with the information. And so there was clearly a lack of trust there. And then we got down to, well, what's causing this? And they sort of universally were pointing at the CEO who was attending the thing. And he said, well, tell me, what do you think? And I said, okay, why don't you leave the room and let people write things up? Just see what comes out of this. And he was very brave, or overconfident, one of the two. And he said, fine. So he went out of the room and people hit those flip charts and started writing. And one of them put up the most foul-mouthed description of this guy. He's a lying this, that. And I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. And when he came back in, he looked at that, he read the other ones first, and then he saw that, he said, ah. And he stopped dead, he turned around, he pointed straight at the guy who he knew had written that, and he said, I know what you mean, you're absolutely right, I was totally wrong. And he then basically laid himself bare. It changed everything because suddenly they felt that they could say something and not be fired the following day. So it wasn't an easy event, but it was one that was quite important at the time.
Very good.
So we got your background.
Yeah, sorry, small storm coming through and internet issues here in Cambridge, the technology centre of the UK.
Yeah.
Ironically. Let me share my screen again and we'll move on as we come to the end of the hour. So a few key considerations that we've been thinking about in the development of our approach is that mastery requires awareness. So the way we go about looking at each of these is helping the individual understand their approach. This is not an assessment approach to say that you have something or not. It's how do you approach trust building? How do you approach valuing difference? How do you approach collaboration, building that foundation skill? And as with all skills, all approaches, all strengths, mastery is still required, and that requires practice, it requires skill building, it requires persistence. So while we have it, it's not always inherent and we may not always access it in the right way. We've spoken about this before, about underassessment underpins growth and potential, not categorization. These, I think, when we have mastery of these core capabilities or essential skills, I think they do lay a foundation, and I think that gives us confidence, it gives us self-efficacy, and that builds autonomy. I think that gives us some sustainability in and confidence in how we approach our role, how we approach others, and importantly, I think how we approach the world as well. It is evolution, not revolution. It is the old word that everybody loves still, which is a journey. It doesn't stop. It's about how do you become better at these. And I think then the core to that is about a strong self-reflective process or practice that individuals have, the ability to stop in the moment, to learn from how they're going and what they've done in order to improve their capability. And the last one is, it's my favorite saying, everybody hears me say it, it's not a hammer or an excuse. When everything, when you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And it's not an excuse. This is my approach. It's my personality. So therefore I can't do anything different. This is about understanding in order to flex, because we do that every day and we're required to do that every day. But when we understand where we're coming from, we've got a better understanding of what skill, support and environment we need in order to do that well. And then when we look at that organizationally, we can start to think about the investment that we can make in people and the environment that we need to make for people in order for them to perform at their best. So a piece of work we've been doing, if you're interested in this document, then it's a description of our core capabilities. It looks at some of the organizational benefits and risks and some of the behaviors and overplayed strengths of those behaviors as well, of the capabilities that I've just shown you. That will be available at the end of next week. So if you're interested, maybe just put a yes into the chat for me and we'll send that out. And I'd be interested in your point of view on that as well. So it looks at those 19 competencies across the work that we're doing. Over the next few months, we'll be developing measures and more intimate knowledge of how each personality goes about doing that in order to form some of our workshops and offering. So I'm going to quickly stop there. Actually, I'm going to come down to this one. So if you haven't signed up some more sessions, here are the sessions that are happening. Well, we're crossing over into one on leadership. That's in Polish. There's a great one on changing your mindset and changing your life at 10. Leadership journey, which is a really interesting conversation, resilience and mental strength. And one that probably kind of echoes the conversation that we've been having this morning, which is the inner sustainability. If you don't know about the inner development goals coming from the UN and the World Health Organization, it's a really fascinating piece of work, and it looks at personal accountability for going into the future. And you can scan that QR code or just go back onto your own website, own Zoom login. So let me just stop there very quickly. Thank you for those people who've put in a yes in the yes box. Happy to take any questions or commentary or critique on the content that you've seen this morning. Otherwise, I will let you get on with your evenings, days. Let Martha go back to bed as it's 3 a.m. still. Yeah. So open floor for anybody that wants to say anything.
I want to thank you, Grant, for opening these conversations. They're not finished. They're unending, actually.
Yeah.
And very happy to continue to do that.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it's about how do we, as a tool, for example, in a suite of solutions, how do we support people going into the future? And I think it's about how do we help people be more confident and have stronger self-efficacy and be more capable, so that they can actually face into the world, because the world's not getting any more sane and quicker. I think it's going to continue to be crazy and circle around. So we've got a unique opportunity, I think, to help people in that process.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Great. Very
okay.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Enjoy your morning, afternoon, and evening. And please, if you're there and you're looking for some light entertainment or some deep thought, then Facet5 Live will be here right through until Thursday afternoon.